by the same token, there were plenty of people who ardently admired him. People who shared his belief, saw him as the champion, and really without equal. There was no one who could make the case for the kind of changes he wanted as well as he could.
Now, Shinzo Abe, Japan's former prime minister, has died after being shot in the back with a homemade gun during an election campaign speech. The attack, in a country where gun crime is rare, has shocked the Japanese people and world leaders. We're joined now by Tobias Harris, who's the Senior Fellow for Asia at the Centre for American Progress and author of Iconoclast Shinzo Abe and the New Japan. Tobias, Shinzo Abe wasn't just Japan's longest serving prime minister. He also invented something that got dubbed Abenomics. I mean, he was a real political thinker and economist on the world stage.
It would be. I think he himself might chuckle to be her, to be described as an economist. I mean, I think he, what fundamentally, former Prime Minister Abe thought about was national power. And that was really the key to his entire project from the start of his political career, was thinking about how to make Japan a first-rank power again, believing that Japan had been restrained after World War II, and that by the end of the Cold War, it was time to remove those restraints and to make Japan a great power again. And then in 2012, recognizing that there was no way to do that without fixing Japan's economy.
And in terms of what Abenomics actually was, what it looked like, what levers he wanted to pull, can you explain just a little bit about what he was trying to do within the demographics of the country, within the industry of the country, and within the service economy of the country?
Sure. So, it was really fundamentally about using, almost experimenting with whatever tools would work. First, to try to defeat deflation, which Japan had had for almost 2 decades, and to try to get people spending again, to get incomes up again. And that was sort of the fundamental first step. But then beyond that, beyond the short-term growth outlook, it was really about looking at a global economy that was much more competitive, and recognizing that between Japan's demographics and the fact that many of its companies had relocated abroad, that Japan had to really think about what its sources for growth were going to be over the longer term, and really using state power, industrial policy, planning, all these things that that Japan had used for a long time, using those again to try to move economic activity into areas where there'd be growth opportunities, and so the cutting edge growth, high tech sectors of the future. And also it was looking at the fact that Japan's labor force had been in long-term decline, and finding ways to at least slow that decline while you find other ways to improve productivity. And so that meant finding ways to bring women into the workforce, finding ways to keep the elderly, when they are forced to retire, finding ways to keep them in the workforce, finding ways to bring foreign workers and bring them in. And so you saw record numbers of foreign workers, finding ways to utilize the young in new ways. I mean, it was all basically trying all these different measures to get the economy going.
Well, I'm sitting here listening to you, Tobias, and you're talking about, creating a competitive economy, reversing deflation, having an industrial policy that goes for growth, improving productivity, getting women into the workplace. And it doesn't sound that revolutionary. And yet we're told today that the attacker that assassinated him had a grudge against Abe, had always intended to kill him. I mean, were these policies particularly divisive in Japan?
I'm reluctant to speculate too much about the motives of the assassin, just because the information that's come out has been fragmentary and contradictory, I think you can say.
But in terms of the general point of how controversial a figure was he post-office?
Well, so the areas where he was controversial and polarizing was less about economics. I mean, and I think, there were times and there were aspects of it that I think, were less popular than others. But this overall thrust of his political project, that Japan had been unfairly treated after 1945 and restricted from playing a proper role in the world stage, and that it was time to lift off those shackles and become a great power again. For a lot of Japanese, the post-war constitution was a great thing. They were happy with Japan having a peaceful identity and didn't see any reason to change that. They saw the post-war institutions as creating Japan as a peaceful, prosperous, egalitarian society, and saw what Abe was proposing as a threat to that, and so I think that made him a controversial figure from very early in his career, and that stuck with him, I think, right up until the end. I mean, of course, by the same token, there were plenty of people who ardently admired him. People who shared his belief, saw him as the champion, and really without equal. There was no one who could make the case for the kind of changes he wanted as well as he could.
And where does that leave his party? Because this occurred at a campaign rally for his Liberal Party, on behalf of other candidates.
So I mean, it's really a major question that's difficult to answer at this point, because really at the moment of his death, he was probably the single most powerful politician in all of Japan, even more powerful than Prime Minister Kishida. He was the formal head of the LDP's largest faction, which the factions are where a lot of power is wielded, certainly when it comes to selecting who leads the party. He was the head of the party's conservative bloc, sort of informal ideological grouping, but of course he was their champion. And as a global statesman, I mean, he just commanded immense respect and a lot of media attention, and had an ability to set the policy agenda even more so than the prime minister. And so you do have a big power vacuum now within the LDP, and it's not quite clear how that gets filled. Whether it's Prime Minister Kishida, whether it's someone else who steps up. Whether it's some other block that forms and tries to fill that vacuum. But it does raise questions about how exactly the government's going to work.
Well, look, thank you very much for explaining all of that. That's Tobias Harris there, Senior Fellow for Asia at the Centre of American Progress and author of the book Iconoclast, Shinzo Abe and the New Japan.